Hello everyone, in this episode I'm going to talk about how you can get started with Cosmos DB using Entity Framework Core. People who don't know what Cosmos DB is Azure's NoSQL document database which is unstructured, but we can create containers and store JSON objects in them. So in this demo, I'm going to create a free Cosmos DB on Azure, and then we'll perform database operations using a console application. The reason why I'm creating console application is because you can literally create any application. You can create Blazor, you can create WPF application, you can create Maui application. You can literally create any .NET project, and using Entity Framework Core, you can perform database operations on Cosmos DB. We'll also create entities and DB context, just like we do it for Entity Framework Core code first approach. And then we'll perform CRUD operations, create, read, update, delete operations on these models and entities which are stored in Cosmos DB. So let's go to our Azure portal and create a free Cosmos DB, and then we'll perform those operations. For that, I'm going to go to my Azure portal here, and I'm going to click on Create Resource. And here I'm going to select Cosmos DB, Azure Cosmos DB, and click on Create. Here we will have different APIs that we can use to perform these database operations. I'm comfortable with SQL, but if you want to connect to your database using MongoDB, Cassandra, Azure Table, or Gremlin, you can do that too. But I'm comfortable with SQL, and that's the reason why I'm going to select SQL here. Once I select SQL, then it's going to ask me, what resource group do we want to put our database into? What's the account name? What's the pricing tier? So let's fill up these details. Currently, I don't have any resource group, so I'm going to create a new one here, which is going to be demo resource group. I'm going to click on OK. And here I'm going to name my account as Northwind DB, because we'll be dealing with Northwind database. And I'm going to select location which is closer to me because it'll be easier for it to reach to. And now here we need to select our tier, our pricing tier. So we have two options. One is provisioned throughput and another is serverless. Let's first talk about provision throughput. In provision throughput, it's saying that you will get your first 1,000 RUs and 25 GB storage in your free account, which is pretty good. Let's first talk about request units. I'm going to literally Google this, request units. So if I go to this first link, which is provided by Microsoft, here they're mentioning what request unit is. A request unit is memory, CPU, and input-output operation required to process data. So basically, a request unit is usage on Azure so that it can calculate, how much it costs to process particular piece of data. And for one RU, you're going to process 1 kilobytes, one read operation on 1 kilobyte database, you're going to consume one request unit. That's what they claim, at least. So when I say we get 1,000 request units per second, that means we can transfer 100 kilobytes, 1,000 kilobytes of data actually per second and perform our database operations, and which is pretty good. If you want to, add more into it, you can later on do that, but this is pretty good to get started with. Now, I am saying that we would like to apply this free tier, and you can apply this free tier for one subscription at a time. So if you create another subscription, you can have free tier there too, but for one subscription, you can have one free tier. Let's talk about serverless. Serverless is basically, it's going to charge us every time we use the database, and it doesn't have any free tier to it. So if you just want to use Cosmos DB just for this demo, you can select serverless option where you'll be charged just for the demo, and then you can keep the database or you can kill it, and you'll be charged only when you use that database. So I'm going to select provision throughput because it's free. I don't really worry about how much it's going to cost, even if it's serverless. And then I'm going to click on review and create. I'm going to skip these other tabs because it doesn't really matter right now because we are just getting started here. So it's going to tell me that I have select demo subscription, it's in demo resource group, the location is East Coast, and account name is Northwind database, the API is SQL, capacity is provision throughput. All those details you'll see on this create and review page. And then I'm going to click on create, which is going to deploy a Cosmos DB into my demo resource group. This is going to take some time to create this database. So I'm going to pause the video here and come back to it once it's done deploying. Here we can see that the deployment is completed. Let's click on go to resource to see if the account is created properly or not. It shows the resource group, the subscription, total throughput limit. It shows the location. We also get an URI that we're going to use later on in this video to connect to this database. So just note that we have this URI too. And it shows what pricing tier that we have selected. Now, this is an account. Let's go ahead and create a database for this account, and then we will create containers for that database. So once I click on this data explorer, you see that we don't really have anything under data. To create a database, I'm going to click on this drop down and click on new database. And it's going to ask me the database ID. I'm going to name my database as Northwind DB. And it also shows the maximum RU that we would like to select because this is a provision throughput. We already get 1000 RUs as the first 3000 RUs for the subscription. So I have selected that. It gets selected by itself. I'm gonna click on OK, which is going to create a database named Northwind DB under our SQL API. Now you can see that the database Northwind DB is created. And if I open that and click on scale, then it shows the capacity of this particular database. And if you want to update this, then you can obviously edit this field and update and scale your database too. Now under this database, we would like to create some containers. So when we are dealing with SQL Server database or MySQL database, we create tables, right? So here we are going to create containers. So here I'm going to create a new container. And I'm going to name this container as employees because in this container, we are going to store employees. And here we have a partition key, which is basically the property that we are going to map with our entity. So we are going to have an ID for each of our entities, which is going to get mapped with this partition key so that Cosmos DB can index that ID properly so that it gets easier to retrieve data. Here I'm going to select capital ID because when we create properties in C#, we start them with capital ID. So I'm going to select capital ID here and then click on OK, which is going to create a container in my Northwind database. You can see that it created a container employees, and here we have items where you can look up for the items. We currently don't have any items. You can go to settings and change the partition keys and indexing policies. Those things you can change here. And you can also create stored procedures, user-defined functions, triggers, but we are not going to get into that today. Let's go ahead and also create a customers database or container so that we can store customer-related information in it. So I'm going to say that we are going to create a container which is going to be customers, and here we are going to map our partition key with property capital ID. And then I'm going to click on OK, which is going to create a new container that we are going to use to store customers in our system. So you can see that both these containers are created. Now in the next section, I'm going to create a console application and perform database operations against these containers. Okay, so here we are in an empty folder. I'm going to create a console application here. The code will be on GitHub. I'll share the link of my GitHub repo in the video description so that you guys can copy paste code in your project too. So here I'm going to open my terminal, PowerShell terminal here, and create a new console application, which is going to be Northwind Cosmos DB. Once I hit enter, it's going to create that project. And if I look it up, you'll see that we have a new folder here, northwind.cosmosdb. Let's go to that folder and then open that folder in our favorite editor, VS Code. And you'll see that it's a typical console application with .NET 6 as the framework. And it prints hello world in console right line. Let's increase the font of this so that it gets easier for you guys to see it. And here we are going to make changes and connect to our Cosmos DB. For that, I'm going to take help of some of the snippets that I've stored, and I'm going to copy paste code from here. So the first thing that we are going to need to do is to add packages into our project file. So I'm going to go to my project file. Here we are going to add two packages. One is going to be Entity Framework Core, and another is going to be the database provider for Cosmos DB package for Entity Framework Core. So I'm going to add these two packages in my project. The next thing that we are going to need to do is to create our entities. We have two containers, employees and customers, but we are also going to have orders for our customers. So we are going to create another entity for orders. So let's create a new folder here. I'm going to name that as models. And here I'm going to create a new file, which is going to be for employee entity, and it's going to be employee.cs. And here I'm going to create a new POCO class where it has some fields. We have an ID for our employee. We have first name, last name, title, date of birth, hire date, address, and phone number, like demographic details for employees. That's something that we have for employees, and we are going to store these details in JSON format on our Cosmos DB. And then we are going to also create a customer. So I'm going to create customer.cs file. And in here, we are going to create a POCO class again, which has, the ID, it has company name, contact title. The customer also has address. And at the end, we have this list of orders that, we haven't really created this class, but a customer can have multiple orders so that, I can show you one-to-many relationship in Cosmos DB too. So let's go ahead and create this class here. So I'm going to create a new class, which is going to be order. And here I'm going to create some fields for order too. So this field also has an ID. It has order date, required date, ship date, and ship via, freight, other details related to shipping. All that information is stored into order entity. So we do have our models now. Now let's go ahead and create a DB context. So just like we create a DB context when we are dealing with entity framework code first approach, we are going to create a DB context like that too. So here I'm going to create a new folder again. I'm going to name it as data. And here I'm going to add a file that I'm going to name as Northwind context.cs. And this is going to be our DB context, which is going to, configure our database, and it's going to also map our entities with the containers which are there in our Cosmos DB. So I'm going to create a class which is going to be a Northwind context, and it's going to be in our entity framework core. So I'm going to save this file. I don't know why this is giving an error, but I'm going to restore my packages. Hopefully that should fix the issue. Yeah, there you go. So you can see that we have we have a class. It's a public class. It's inheriting from DB context, and it's coming from the package that we just installed on our project. So like I said, this is going to be just like code first approach, and we are going to need to create on model creating and on configuring methods that are going to, configure our Cosmos DB. But before that, we are going to need to create some DB sets. So I'm going to create two DB sets. One is going to be for employee, to store employees in our container, and other is going to be for customers. Now we are going to need to configure these DB context so that we can store these into containers. So let's first create or override on configuring method, which is going to configure our project with the Cosmos DB. So I'm going to override a method which is going to be on configuring, which takes option builder. And we are going to use this option builder to configure our project with our Cosmos DB. I'm going to use this use Cosmos DB method, which is going to help us do that. If I hover over this method, you'll see that it takes account endpoint, it takes account key and database name. So let's get these from our Cosmos DB, and our database name is Northwind-DB. So let's go to our Northwind database here. And if I scroll down here, we have these keys, and do not share these keys with anyone. I'm going to delete this database. I'm going to delete the whole resource group so that you don't use my free tier, but don't share these keys with anyone, because this is the keys that you use to perform read and write operations on your database. So the URI, like I mentioned in the previous section, we are going to use this to connect to our database. This is the account endpoint. So I'm going to copy this and go to my console application here and paste that account endpoint here, that the URI that we got from our database. And we have primary key here. So I'm going to copy that. That is actually going to be the account key that we are going to use to perform read and write operation. So I'm going to paste that here. And finally, the last parameter is database name, which is going to be Northwind_-DB. So this is how we can configure our console application with our Cosmos DB. Now, next thing, we are going to need to map our DB sets with our entities, with our containers. So let's go ahead and do that. For that, I'm going to override on model creating method, which is going to help us configuring our entities to our containers. So this on model creating method takes model builder as parameter, and we're going to use that to map our entities. So this is our entity. Employee is one of the entities, the model that we created, and we are going to map this to our container employees. So if I go back to my Cosmos DB, here we have Data Explorer, and in Data Explorer we have two containers. One is employees and another is customer. I'm going to map employees with my employee entity with partition key as ID. And then we also have customers. So I'm going to map customer entity with customers container here. This is the customers container. And the partition key is going to be the ID. We are also going to mention that the customer has one-to-many relationship with orders, so that it can consider that while performing the database operations. So this is how we can configure our project, create a DB context that is going to help us to connect to our Northwind database, Northwind Cosmos DB database. Now that we have DB context, we can use this DB context in order to perform operations. So I'm going to get rid of this piece of code here, and I'm going to add some lines in my program.cs, which is going to use Northwind DB context, the context that we created. And we are going to use this class to perform operations. The first operation that I would like to perform is to insert employees. So here I'm going to add some code which is going to create two objects of employees. This is employee 1 and this is employee 2. Let's take a look at employee 1. Employee 1 is, we're setting the demographic details. But one thing to notice here is I'm setting global unique ID here for my employee. And I'm not a big fan of global unique IDs, but you can, have a counter container which counts your IDs, and then you can map those here too. But if you don't have that, you can obviously use GoID here too. So that's how I'm assigning the IDs, and I'm assigning the demographic details for employee 1. I'm assigning GoID here for my second employee 2, and then I'm assigning the demographic details for my employee 2. And finally, just like we use our EF Core APIs, we are going to use the DB set to add employee 1 and employee 2 into my DB sets here. And finally, I'm going to call Northwind context save changes to insert these two employees into my Cosmos DB. So let's go ahead and see if that works or not. For that, I'm going to go to my PowerShell here, and I'm going to say .NET run. This is going to connect to my Cosmos DB, and it's going to perform two insert operations, and it's going to add that into our container. So I'm going to, this is run properly. I'm going to go back to my data explorer here and click on items, and you'll see those two items inserted into my Cosmos DB. So the first one is Nancy. So if I go back to my code here, the first one is Nancy, and the second one is John Smith. So if I go to my second employee, you'll see John Smith added into this container. One thing to notice here is the ID is GUID. And there's another thing to notice here is the discriminator employee. That's how it knows that, this item is different from other items in the container. That's what it's using to separate these objects from other objects in other containers. And this used to be only one container. They used to only give one container with 1,000 RUs, but now they have separated, which is pretty cool. Now that's how you insert two employees. What I'm going to do is I'm going to insert some customers too. I'm going to comment this code, and then let's go ahead and insert some customers too. So here I'm going to add some lines of code, which is going to create a customer where I'm assigning a GUID, and then I have some demographic details for customer. And we have orders as one-to-many relationship with customers. And you can see that I'm creating new orders for that customer, where I'm also assigning the GUID for it, and then other details which are needed for the orders. So this customer will have 3 orders in different locations, or actually the same location. And that's how you can create one-to-many relationship between your object and other objects in your database, in your system. And finally, I'm going to use Northwind customers add and add customer. And then finally, I'm going to say save changes to save the changes. Let's go ahead and see if that works or not. So I'm going to run .NET run again, and that should create a customer object into my Cosmos DB. So if I go to my customer items, you'll see it's creating a customer object here, or JSON object here. And here you'll see the discriminator, and then the ID, and then it has one-to-many relationship with orders. And that's how orders are stored into our Cosmos DB. So that's how you create customers. Let's move on and try to get employees. So I'm going to comment these lines again here so that they don't get run again. And then I'm going to add some line to get employees. So just like we get employees in our EF Core other database providers, we are going to follow the same methods. We are going to first check if our DB set is null or not. If it's not null, then I'm going to use list async to get all the employees from the system, and then I'm using for each loop and trying to print first name, last name, and hire date of the 2 employees that we just inserted. So let's go ahead and run this. I'm going to say .NET Run, which is going to print 2 employees. One is going to be Nancy and another one is going to be John Smith. So this is how you can get data, just like we get data while using other EF Core data providers. Same way you can get data too. Now, this is how you get multiple datas. What if you want to just get one object? For that, you can use where conditions, just like we can use where conditions for other database providers. So here you can see that I'm checking if the DB set is not null, then I would like to look up for John. The first name is John. You can use where conditions and try to get that employee, and finally print the details of that employee. Let's see if that works or not. For that, I'm going to go to my PowerShell here again and run .NET Run and see if we can see only John's information or not. It's going to connect to our CosmosDB and it's going to look up for John and it's going to print John's information here. So that's how you can get a particular object. Let's try to update that object. For that, I'm going to add some more code here, which is going to update an employee. Here, I'm going to look up for that employee just like we looked up in the previous code. And once we find that employee, then we can just update the properties of that employee. So John had last name Smith. We are going to update it to Doe, and it had 2001 as the hire date. We had a typo and we would like to correct that. So I'm updating John's information to the last name as Doe and the hire date to 2002. It was 2001. So if I go to the items, you can see the hire date is 2001 and last name is Smith. So let's go ahead and update this and see if that gets updated or not. I want to make sure that I have saved the file. And then I'm gonna run .NET Run, which is going to hopefully update the data. So it says record is updated. If I go back to my employee, you can see that John's first name is same, but the last name got updated to Doe, and the hire date got updated to 2002, not 2001. So that's how you can update an object. I'm gonna go back to my code here again, and let's check out if we can delete an object. For that, I'm going to add some more code. And just like we delete in EF4, we are going to first look up for that object and then use dbset and its remove function and pass the employee that we would like to delete. You can also use remove range, which is going to remove multiple employees. And finally, we are going to use Northwind context save changes, which is going to save the database. So let's go ahead and run this, and hopefully that is going to delete our John Smith's record. And I'm gonna run that command in my PowerShell window here. And hopefully it should say that record has been deleted. So if I go back to my CosmosDB, refresh my container here, and you can see that there's only one record, and it is Nancy's record. John's record is deleted. So this is how you can perform CRUD operations. Just get started with CosmosDB for free and perform CRUD operations on different containers in your CosmosDB. If you have any questions, please post them in the comment section below. Before I end the video, I would like to thank my members on YouTube who are supporting financially QS Drive channels so that I can find more time to make videos like this. So I would like to thank my members. And like I said, if you have any questions, please post them in the comment section below. I would love to answer them, or you can reach out to me on my Twitter or Facebook handle. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.